everyone. Glad you could join us. I'm Richard Poore.
And I'm Rick Meager.
Our show is The Inevitable Evolution of Democrats to Communists, and this is part 2 of Evolving Toward Being Everything to Everyone.
In part 1, we discussed the origins of communism, early communal America, the founding of the contemporary Democratic Party, and how they've evolved from being the ultra-conservative arbiter of the rights of the common man, as long as that man is white, to attempting to be everything to everyone.
So we're up to the official naming of the party in 1840. At this time, the federal government wasn't remotely as controlling as it is today. In fact, a popular series of books written by Alex de Tocqueville repeatedly emphasized the amazing difference between the government of the United States and other countries because it was so decentralized. In other words, the people had the power instead of the government.
So since you mentioned government, what about taxation during this time?
Wow, there was almost none. Few people actually had any currency, hard money, to pay taxes, and the first permanent income tax wasn't until 1913. Most taxes were on property or on goods and services like stamps for mail or alcohol, tea or coffee, fabrics. An annual property tax on 50 acres of farmland around this time was typically about $30 in today's money. The states collected any federal taxes and then passed them on to whomever.
Wow, and if you added everything up, what did it come out to?
Probably less than 1%, depending on where you lived and what you had to purchase.
1%?
Less than.
Obviously, the Democratic Party wasn't remotely like it is today.
Yeah, so let's fast forward through the Civil War and Reconstruction. The Democratic Party, still ultra-conservative, became the leading party of the post-Reconstruction South. By the early 1900s, the Democrats became more involved with labor and, of course, were more influenced by socialists. By the time of the New Deal in the 30s, during that Great Depression, their policies were trending far more liberal than previously.
So you mentioned socialism. Back to it in communism, we mentioned the biblical reference in early communes. When did socialists and communists start getting involved in U.S. politics?
Well, the Socialist Labor Party actually started in 1877. Through the next decades, it merged with various groups, evolving only recently into the Democrat Socialists of America. And that's the party that helped the Socialist Squad, you're familiar with them, get elected to Congress within just the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I read the DSA just helped India Walton defeat the Buffalo, New York mayor in the Democratic primary.
You got it. While she ran on the Democratic Party ticket, she is an outspoken socialist. And dozens of other federal and state level politicians have been elected through the efforts of the DSA throughout the years. And of course, they exert their influence on the Democrats.
So I gotta ask, what is their ultimate goal?
Well, Rick, as we stated at the start of the show, they want to be everything to everyone. And the only way to do that is to promise and deliver money and support. And of course, that only comes with more government control over health care, education, transportation, social services, and the like. And that control, of course, comes at a pretty big cost.
Well, we know they're pushing a redistribution of wealth, taxing successful citizens to support those less successful, even though the percentage of federal tax-paying families is already down to only 53%.
Hey, if all this hasn't yet made it clear why we use the words evolution and inevitable, then you aren't paying attention.
Well, this socialism idea is depressing. There's an interesting quote by a guy named Whittaker Chambers, who was a practicing communist for 12 years. He said, "A socialist is just a communist without the clause." He also wrote that Marxism is often disguised with names like progressivism or social democrat.
And every new socialist act requires its own layers of government, of course. Administration, regulation, enforcement, not to mention all the money spent advertising or marketing the new idea, like our government spending money marketing the idea of the vaccines, in hopes of getting people to buy into it.
Oh yeah, when Obamacare was being developed, just trying to figure out everything took years. not including implementation and promotions. And the very people it was intended to help most generally refused or were unable to pay even their tiny share.
Yeah, that Supreme Court case a couple of weeks ago makes it look like it's here to stay. Even though years after implementation, less than 10% of Americans, just over 30 million, are enrolled. We aren't going further into this stuff today, but you see where this everything to everyone is heading.
Yeah, we should touch on formal communism in the U.S., even though we already know it's just socialism without the clause.
Well, the U.S. Communist Party was founded in 1919. It's gone in and out of popularity, usually out during times of war or in during times when the country is highly polarized, like today. Its membership topped out around 100,000 people in the late 40s, and they've never elected a major candidate. But they, like the socialists, exert their influence on democratic politics and policies.
And, as we already said, we don't expect the Democrats to ever call themselves communists, so the name itself may be irrelevant.
Agreed. But who would have thought 20 years ago that they would have members who are avowed socialists and would be submitting presidential candidates running on a socialist platform?
Yeah, that's a good point. As we go further in the podcast, each episode will present more and more evidence of the ongoing Democratic Party evolution. Obviously, a lot of diehards think it's good.
No question. Some evolution is necessary for survival, but what's happened in just a few generations and continues today is nothing short of an effort to have government, not the people, completely control our economy and every aspect of society. And part of the plan is a form of political opinion indoctrination being done through manipulation of communications, the media, propaganda, and of course the cancel culture.
And through the use of euphemisms at every opportunity to control their narrative and soften or hide true intentions, with constant applications of guilt and amazingly transparent hypocrisy to which their followers turn a blind eye.
Or maybe they're just blissfully unaware, Rick.
Yeah, but Richard, the platform of the Democratic Party as we know it is, by definition, already largely socialist.
Yeah, they're not only comfortable doling out cash to voters, regardless of their contributions to society, they actively advocate this. There's definitely been a massive shift over the years from support of only white men, slavery, no females, and anti-Native American isolationism, to let's be everything to everyone.
Of course, without any logical ability to be everything to everyone.
Nor any ability to rein in runaway government.
Or debt.
You got it. Well, everyone, we need to wrap it up for today.
Hey, before we leave, where did that jackass as the Democrat symbol originate?
Oh, yeah. It first appeared in a cartoon by Thomas Nast in Harper's Weekly magazine back in 1870. It was a reference to Democrat-controlled newspapers in the post-war South kicking the butt of Lincoln's Secretary of War. Interestingly, Rick, 4 years later, Nast also came up with the elephant for Republicans in another cartoon.
Hard to believe one guy came up with both symbols that are still being used 150 years later.
But appropriate, don't you think, that they both came from cartoons?
There's a story in there for sure.
We hope you'll join us for our next episode, when we'll consider the Founding Fathers and why, in a matter of months, you don't hear them referenced anymore. Are we now minimalizing them?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that until we were discussing it.
Even more important is where this leads. If the Democrats' agenda continues in its current direction, will the founders become irrelevant? And when this happens, are we denying our roots?
Interesting. It's one thing to recognize your problems, past and present, in order to avoid repeating them. But it's another to be told what to remember and how to remember it.
Yeah, too much of that already happening. And if politicians no longer use the Founding Fathers for their validation and propaganda, who decides what to replace them with?
Hey, Richard, this just in. A piece just published in the Wall Street Journal titled Biden's Plan for Entitlement. It says that if his American Family's Plan passes, For the first time in history, more than half of Americans will be supported in one way or another by the federal government. And much of this will be paid for, no surprise here, with borrowed money.
Ugh. Talk about evolution. I guess the number we mentioned earlier, only 53% of American families paying federal income tax, is already outdated.
We'll research and validate these numbers. Depending on how that shakes out, this may warrant a part 3 of this Everything to Everyone episode.
In any case, we'll be sure to incorporate these findings in an upcoming show.
Well, everyone, we appreciate you joining us and hope this has been entertaining and informative.
As always, if you'll provide your email address or phone number via the message icon on democratstocommunists.com, we'll send an email or text reminder. And please tell your friends about the show.
Also, leave us your comments and suggestions, and keep them constructive. Remember, we aren't here to bash Democrats. We're just here to mentor and gently guide them back onto the enlightened path.
Signing off for now, I'm Richard Poor.
And I'm Rick Meager.
We're Poor Richard and Meager Rick.
See you next week.